back to my channel. I'm carrying on reviewing Empire of Normality from where I left off last time. I left my book next door, so I can't be asked to get up and get it again. It's too much effort. Floor's so dirty, I need to clean it. It's annoying me. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I'm not going to be able to show you the book, but do check out my other videos where I already have reviewed the book so far, where you can see me holding up the book. But yeah, it's Empire of Normality by Chapman, so I'm carrying off from where I left off last time. I can't actually remember what number of videos I am on now. It's quite high. It will be in the subject bar anyway. So in my last video, I just got up to the bit where I'd mentioned Chapman talking about shadow syndromes, and I said I wasn't really keen on that idea. The idea of milder versions of existing diagnoses. But that implies that they're the same as the existing diagnoses. That seems rather iffy to me. So no, I don't really agree with that idea. Psychiatry is just more aware now of the different permutations of autism, and autism can be severe, regardless of what type it is. Like, the condition I have is not a shadow of another disorder, it's a disorder in and of itself. It might not have been defined as autism back in the day when autism was understood very narrowly as someone who couldn't talk or who had very limited language, and maybe an intellectual disability, but that's not the condition I have. It's a valid condition in and of itself. It's not a shadow syndrome. However, it's possible that some people, particularly those wanting to go on about autism not being a disorder and just a difference, and you don't seem to be that impaired by it, those, like, you know what I mean, those really, 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 really mild, like, basically they don't seem to have any functional impairment. I'm not even sure how they get diagnosed. A lot of them self-diagnose, which is really wrong. They don't even bother to get diagnosed, and I don't think they'd actually be able to get diagnosis anyway if they're not impaired, because that's not possible. Maybe they have shadow syndromes. Maybe. I guess we'd call it a broader autism phenotype. So, yeah, he argues that more people were harmed by the needs of a new economy and its sensory, cognitive and emotional requirements, resulting in more people falling under the autism banner. I'm not entirely sure myself. I think that's a rather controversial thing to say, because that implies that autism is only disabling because of society. I think maybe for those who are like really, 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 really mild, that might be the case. In other words, if you changed society, they no longer meet the criteria, but that would have to be quite a small number of people, I think. That's not to say, by the way, that modern society isn't bad for autistic people. I think it is bad for autistic people, and I think it can make existing impairments even worse. It's just that I'd go so far as to say that I think those impairments would exist no matter what society. Obviously, in a society that's more accommodating and maybe isn't as loud and you get the support you need, an autistic might not feel as impaired as they maybe do under, say, a sort of neoliberal, noisy, capitalist society, but they still be impaired, ultimately, I think. So Chapman says that when it comes to the requirement for sociality, hyperflexibility, and emotional labour, it's not just that stress levels have risen among the general population, he says. He says that also the autism diagnosis has become radically expanded. But this is where I disagree with him. I don't think it's just because of those things that the autism has expanded. I don't think it's because of those things at all. I think that autism has expanded because we just have more awareness now. We have more awareness that many, many people have social deficits and essentially meet the criteria for autism, who, say, have a good grasp of language and might not necessarily have a significant intellectual disability. We just have more awareness now and understanding of the many different permutations of autism. And I'd say that autism is always a very, or should be at least, a very disabling, intrinsically disabling disorder, no matter what society we live in, because I don't think we can safely call it autism if it isn't. I'm not denying that there maybe are broader phenotype people who do have shadow syndromes who might only fall under the criteria under certain conditions, but they, I would say, would be an exception. They don't represent most autistic people. they are like the mildest of the mild. Think people like Chris Packham. I'm not denying he has struggles or anything, and I think he is obviously like legitimately someone with very, very able Asperger's. But like someone like him, he's able to do pretty well for himself, and maybe like his type of autism can be better accommodated, because he's not like as impacted as say someone like me. So maybe like we could define someone like Chris Packham has a shadow syndrome potentially. I don't know, but I think we have to be quite careful with that anyway. I say potentially because obviously, I want to be careful, and I don't want to draw assumptions about people that I don't know their inner lives or anything like that. But obviously, he is obviously the exception, because most people can't do what Packham does. I mean, even non-autistic people would be hard pressed to do the sort of things he does. He's leading a pretty functional life for most people's standards. Anyway, I digress. So the idea that autism diagnosis is radically expanded, but I think that's more to do with increasing awareness into a spectrum in around 1979, and has continually widened as an ever-rising percentage of the population falls short of the social sensory capabilities required by the new economy. But like I said, if you only get diagnosed autistic because you fall short of the social and sensory capabilities required by the new economy, and if it's the only reason you're autistic, implying that if you changed society maybe to like more like a Fordist economy, that you then lose that diagnosis, you've got to be very, very mild. Like, I'm not discounting the struggles these people face under the new situation. Maybe the new situation has made them disabled in a way they weren't previously. But all I'm saying is, if that's the only reason that you're impaired is because of society, the actual innate disorder can't be that severe. That's all I'm saying. Okay, because obviously for someone like me, I can't work no matter what society, do you know what I mean? Society is not the reason why I can't work. I literally cannot work. It doesn't matter what society it is. It could be like a perfect socialist type society. All the supports I need, I still wouldn't be able to work. I still would really struggle to have like relationships and that. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah. Anyway, he says the expansion of autism diagnosis directly applied to people who were blocked from working in the services economy. But like I said, these people have to be at the very, 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 very mild end. They're not people like me. It's got to be quite a different... Yeah, I think we can legitimately say they do have a shadow syndrome. It just doesn't apply to people like me. Neoliberalism and cognitive capitalism also brought a pace and tempo of life that has increasingly disabled those whose cognitive processing... try and change the page... Stuck to my fingers, come on. Fits less hurried pace. Whose cognitive processing fits a less hurried pace. A quote now from someone called Robert Hassan. To be efficient is to be physically, cognitively, psychologically, and metaphorically able to move fast when the time comes. So, to flexibly change your job often. Flexibility regarding the way one does a job, etc. It is unsurprising, Chapman says, that a diagnosis where a central criterion is resistance to change would expand from 1980. Yeah, I really don't agree with where he's going here. The reason the diagnosis expanded after 1980 is not to do with the change in society. I'm not denying that the change in society into more neoliberal society might well be particularly stressful for autistic people. I'm not denying that. But that's not the reason why more people are getting diagnosed now. Come on. The reason why more people are getting diagnosed now is because, like I've said, the understanding of what constitutes autism has evolved. And indeed, most psychiatric disorders evolve over time. That's natural. That's progressive. It ensures more people get support. Because all psychiatric diagnoses always start very narrow. In actual fact, that's the case for all diagnoses, psychiatric or other, is that they always start very, very narrow. A sort of prototype, if you like. Very few people will fit any original definition. And then over time, they do research, they think, oh, look, it also fits these people. They might not exactly fit the original prototype, but you can see that it also fits these people because you become more aware of different ways a disorder can manifest in different people. That's the case for all disorders. And that's progressive, and that's right, because like I say, it ensures more people get support. It would be very reactionary and stagnant if a disorder didn't evolve, if we didn't recognise different manifestations. I mean, the question also lies, obviously, of course, eventually you get to a point where that broadening has to stop, because by that point the disorder no longer has any internal validity or reliability as well. So you do have to get to a point where eventually you're like, well, okay, now maybe we need to kind of do some fine tuning and maybe create subgroups so that a bit more categorisation, a bit more, honing in sort of thing, because you don't want to get too broad, but you don't want to be too narrow either. So broadening out is very, very important and progressive, and that's largely the reason why the autism diagnosis has expanded. Particularly since the identification of what used to be called Asperger's syndrome, which didn't occur until the 1980s, and it wasn't even introduced into the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders until 1994. And I think the International Classification of Diseases, ICD, ICD in, I think it was 1991 or 2, so, and obviously then awareness among the lay population is a bit slow to catch up, so just because it entered the diagnostic manuals in the early 90s, it took a bit longer for recognition to sort of permeate through into education and training, for general public to be aware of it. And of course now Asperger doesn't exist because they've folded it all into generic ASD, for better or worse. But yeah, growing awareness. We understand now that autism doesn't just have one face. I don't think it has anything to do, really, with a change in society. I don't think that's the reason why more people are getting diagnosed. Unless your autism is exceptionally mild, in which case it would only be caused by society, but I think that would be like a really tiny minority of people, because for most people autism is inherent, and society of course can make that worse, but no matter what society you have, you're always going to be autistic. I'd be autistic in a perfect socialist utopia, I'd still have a disorder, that wouldn't change. Okay, so what I'm saying is, I went off on one a bit there. So yeah, I disagree with Chapman when he says it's unsurprising that a diagnosis where essential criterion is resistant to change would expand from 1980. He said, a cognitive space overloaded with nervous incentive to act, where you have screens everywhere. He also suggests that that's the reason why ADHD has increased as well. And again, I disagree. I think the reason ADHD has increased as a diagnosis is simply, again, more awareness. But obviously, modern society can be particularly toxic for people with ADHD because of screens everywhere and all of that. But that doesn't cause ADHD. It just makes it harder for people who would have ADHD no matter what. It just makes things harder for them. It doesn't actually cause the ADHD. He says that they then become disenabled. Again, it's very implying that it's caused by society. I completely disagree with that. He does say, however, that it's not to say that these problems not exist prior to post-Fordism. So he accepts that they did exist prior to post-Fordism. Or that things like autism or ADHD are not real disabilities. He says they're no less real than diabetes, he says, but existing forms of difficulty or disablement, while to some extent grounded in atypical neurological development, he says, in many cases it's become hugely amplified because of neoliberalism. Now, yeah, as I said, I'm not denying that neoliberalism can compound these problems, but I don't think it compounds it enough to make more people get diagnosed. I disagree with that. Because if it was only that, then your innate impairment wouldn't be that significant, and it may well apply to like these super able neurodiversity advocates who aren't even that impacted to begin with, and maybe for them, you just change society and like, they're all fine, they're going, oh, I'm so proud to be autistic, it's a great thing, it's a gift, you just change society and everything's okay. And maybe they do struggle, under particular circumstances more than others, and you just change it and they're alright. But like, unfortunately that is not the case for the majority of autistic people. So if I wrote a book, it would be a completely different perspective, because, to borrow from Marx, we're always situated in our materiality, and my experience of autism is very different, so I would write a book quite differently to this. Anyway, I'm going to move over to video number 2 now, the next video, and it's to carry on talking about this. So moving on to video number 2 now.